At 3:14 in the morning, in the pitch-black waters of the Gulf of Oman, a ship made a decision that would be studied in naval war colleges for the next 20 years. The ship was called the MT Arash. On paper, she was registered in Panama, flying a neutral commercial flag, listed as a routine cargo carrier moving industrial equipment between ports. She was running at 14 knots through one of the world's busiest shipping corridors, with her identification system switched off and no visible lights on her outer deck. To anyone who did not know what to look for, she looked like background noise, just another vessel moving through the dark. She was not background noise. She was not a neutral cargo carrier. And what happened to her exactly 6 hours and 22 minutes after the USS Ramage first locked onto her radar is one of the most significant naval enforcement actions the United States has carried out in the Persian Gulf region in decades. As of 3:14 a.m., on April 22, 2026, the Gulf of Oman became a very different place. The USS Ramage had been tracking the Arash for 3 hours before the first warning transmission went out. The Ramage's intelligence team already knew the ship's real name. They already knew who owned her. They already knew what was sitting inside her locked cargo containers in the lower hold. What unfolded next, from the first radio call to the moment United States Navy SEALs stepped onto her deck through helicopter fast ropes in the gray early morning light, was not a surprise for the crew of the Ramage. It was a procedure. A precise, documented, legally airtight procedure that ended with the Arash sitting dead in the water and everything she was carrying in American hands before 9 a.m. In this deep dive, we are going to walk through every stage of what happened that morning. We are going to explain what the Arash was really doing, what the USS Ramage did and why, what the SEALs found when they cut open those containers, and what the seizure of this one ship means for the next phase of the entire Gulf standoff. We are going to show you why Iran's most carefully planned covert supply operation of 2026 collapsed in the space of a single morning. The MT Arash was supposed to vanish into the night and deliver her cargo before anyone could prove what she was. Instead, she became a message. And the United States Navy made sure every nation on Earth received it. United States intelligence had been tracking the MT Arash for 11 months before the morning of April 22nd. She was not a random ship that wandered into the wrong waters. She was the product of a very deliberate plan, funded, organized, and executed by people inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps who believed they had found a way to keep Iranian military supply lines running despite the most comprehensive U.S. naval blockade the Persian Gulf had seen since 1988. The plan was genuinely sophisticated. The Arash had been re-registered in Panama under the name Pacific Star. Her crew manifests were clean. Her cargo declaration listed agricultural machinery and spare industrial parts. The shipping company of record was based in Dubai with no visible Iranian connections. On every official document, this ship had absolutely nothing to do with Iran. Underneath all that paperwork, the reality was completely different. The Arash was owned through a chain of shell companies that U.S. Treasury analysts had spent months mapping. Companies that ultimately traced back to financial accounts connected to the IRGC Navy. Her cargo, sealed in 18 locked steel containers in her lower hold, was not agricultural machinery. Post-seizure intelligence reports confirmed that those containers held military-grade drone components, encrypted battlefield communications hardware, and materials used in the assembly of short-range ballistic systems. All of it was bound for an IRGC logistics facility near the port of Jask on Iran's southern coastline. The strategy was to move at night, blend into commercial traffic, cross the Gulf of Oman before dawn, when surveillance activity is statistically lower, and reach Iranian waters before any interdiction force could get close enough to act. It was a calculated run at the blockade, and the people running it had reason to believe it could work. 11 similar operations had been attempted in the previous 3 months. 3 of them had made it through. The other 8 had been turned away at the perimeter when inspections found documentation problems. The Arash was their best attempt yet. Her captain had 18 years of experience running exactly this kind of covert passage. His documentation was cleaner than anything that had gone before. His timing was deliberate. He was confident. He was also being watched by American intelligence analysts who had been building a file on this ship since the previous June. At 3:14 a.m., the Ramage's radar operator flagged the anomaly. The MT Arash, still traveling as Pacific Star at that point, was running completely dark. No AIS signal, no navigation lights, no response to standard hailing frequencies. In commercial shipping, switching off your automatic identification system is not a technical malfunction. It is a choice, and it is the kind of choice that brings a guided missile destroyer alongside you within minutes. Commander David Hargrove, the Ramage's commanding officer, ordered his crew to close the distance. He had been enforcing the blockade for 9 days at this point and had turned away 14 vessels. He had also intercepted 6. He knew exactly what a ship running dark in the Gulf of Oman at 3 a.m. was attempting. The first transmission went out at 3:22 a.m. Unknown vessel bearing northeast at 14 knots. This is United States Navy warship on your port quarter. You are operating without AIS in a restricted maritime zone. Activate your identification system immediately and reduce speed. Acknowledge this transmission. Nothing. The Arash held course. The Ramage moved to within 900 meters, close enough in daylight to read the name painted on her hull. The Arash's crew could see the destroyer alongside them. They chose not to respond. By 4:15 a.m., the Ramage had cross-referenced the vessel's hull configuration against its intelligence database and identified her. The second phase of transmissions began. Motor vessel MT Arash, operating under false registry Pacific Star. This is United States Navy warship USS Ramage. You are in violation of United States naval interdiction operations in the Gulf of Oman. You are ordered to heave to immediately, activate your identification systems, and prepare to receive a boarding party. Failure to comply will result in the use of disabling measures. This is a direct order under Maritime Interdiction Authority. Acknowledge now. Silence. Hour 2 passed. Hour 3. The sun began pulling color into the eastern sky, turning the Gulf of Oman from black to deep blue. The Arash was still moving at 14 knots. The Ramage was still alongside her. And 15 kilometers to the east, something the Arash's captain did not know about, had repositioned overnight. The USS Bataan, a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship displacing 41,000 tons, was holding intercept position with 4 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters already powered up on her flight deck and a SEAL team staged and ready in the aircraft. At the 4-hour mark, the Arash made a move. The wrong move. Her captain increased speed to 17 knots, trying to open distance between his ship and the destroyer running beside him. The Ramage matched the increase within 90 seconds and closed the gap back to 800 meters. The acceleration changed nothing except confirming that the Arash knew exactly what was happening and had decided to keep running anyway. At 7:44 a.m., 6 hours and 20 minutes after first contact, Commander Hargrove transmitted the final warning. MT Arash, this is your absolute final warning. All crew members are ordered to move to the forward deck immediately and away from the engine room. We are about to engage your propulsion system with disabling fire. You have one opportunity to comply. This is the last transmission before we act. 6 minutes passed. The Arash did not respond. She did not slow down. At 7:50 a.m., the order was given: fire. The Ramage's 5-inch Mk-45 naval gun, a weapon capable of landing a round accurately from 13 miles out, locked onto the Arash's stern section. The firing solution had been calculated an hour earlier. The gun crew had been ready since 6 a.m. The first round struck the rudder assembly with precision that left no room for doubt. It destroyed the steering mechanism completely. The second round hit the propulsion shaft housing. The third struck the engine room access structure. The sound of a 5-inch naval gun discharging carries across open water in a way that stops everything. A deep, heavy concussion that hits your chest before it reaches your ears. Within 4 minutes of the first shot, the MT Arash was dead in the water. No steering, no propulsion. 180 meters of Iranian military supply infrastructure sitting motionless in the Gulf of Oman, with a destroyer 700 meters off her beam and 4 helicopters already airborne from the Bataan. The call went from the Ramage to the Bataan. Target is disabled. Commence boarding operations. The Seahawks reached the Arash in 6 minutes. Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 3 fast roped onto the forward deck in under 40 seconds. Within 11 minutes of the first boots hitting the steel deck, the entire ship was under American control. The crew, 23 men, was detained on the main deck under armed guard. The engine room was inspected for casualties. The lower hold was accessed. The 18 sealed containers were cut open one by one. What the SEALs found inside those containers was photographed, cataloged, and transmitted to CENTCOM in Tampa before 9 a.m. The images were classified within the hour. Summaries were shared with allied governments by noon. The MT Arash had sailed from her last port carrying enough military hardware to supply an IRGC drone program for 6 months. She had tried to disappear before dawn. She ended up delivering the most damaging intelligence package Iran had lost in a maritime seizure in over a decade. While the Arash was making her approach through the Gulf of Oman, something very different was happening 400 kilometers away. According to intelligence assessments shared with allied governments after the seizure, Iranian military planners had been monitoring the Arash's progress in real time through encrypted satellite feeds routed to an IRGC naval command facility on Iran's southern coast. 3 senior commanders were in that operations room watching the ship move toward Iranian waters, tracking her progress hour by hour, convinced the operation was on track. They believed it would succeed. 3 similar operations had succeeded in the 2 months before April 22nd. The Arash's cover documentation was the cleanest they had ever produced. The timing had been chosen specifically to exploit a window in U.S. patrol rotations. At approximately 3:30 a.m., less than 10 minutes after the Ramage's first transmission, those commanders realized the window did not exist. The Ramage's immediate move to intercept and its rapid identification of the vessel told them something that changed the entire picture. U.S. intelligence had known about the Arash before she entered the interdiction zone. She had not slipped through undetected. She had been walked into a trap. The decision made in that operations room was to maintain silence. If the ship did not acknowledge the transmissions, if it kept moving, there was a calculation, an incorrect calculation, as it turned out, that the United States would not fire on a vessel flying a foreign flag in international waters without creating diplomatic consequences too expensive to accept. That calculation was based on a version of American restraint that no longer existed in the spring of 2026. By the time disabling fire began at 7:50 a.m., those 3 commanders had already left the room. The Arash was gone, the cargo was lost, and within 24 hours, IRGC-affiliated media was calling the seizure an act of piracy on the high seas, a description that found very little international sympathy given what the SEALs had found in those 18 containers. The seizure of the MT Arash matters far beyond the value of 1 ship and 1 cargo load. Iran's entire covert maritime supply strategy has been built on a single core assumption that false registration, manipulated documentation, and the legal complexity of international waters would create enough ambiguity and hesitation to make interdiction operationally and politically costly for the United States. Run dark, use shell companies, disguise the cargo, pick the right timing, and the sheer administrative burden of proving what a ship actually is would slow the American response long enough to get through. The Ramage's operation on April 22nd dismantled that assumption at every level. The ship was identified before it entered the interdiction zone, not during. The intelligence file on the Arash was 11 months old. The legal documentation of every warning transmission was airtight before a single shot was fired. And when the decision was made to disable the vessel, it was executed in under 4 minutes with 0 crew casualties. The cargo discovery added a dimension that transforms this from a routine interdiction into something much larger. Military-grade drone components and ballistic materials in containers labeled as agricultural equipment is not a sanctions violation. It is an active military supply operation being conducted under deliberate cover. Under international law, that distinction matters enormously, and the United States now holds physical evidence of it in a form that cannot be credibly disputed. Iran's foreign ministry called the seizure illegal. But the legal argument is extremely difficult to sustain when the physical evidence of what the ship was actually carrying has already been shared with allied governments. documented by U.S. naval personnel on film, and transmitted to international partners before the sun was fully up. You can argue about maritime law. You cannot argue about what was in those containers. The power shift this represents is significant and compounding. Every covert supply route Iran loses makes the next one harder to establish. Every seizure, like the Arash, raises the cost of attempting the same kind of operation again. Iran is not running out of ships, but it is running out of cover stories that the United States cannot see through. 20 hours after the Arash was seized, Brent crude oil moved $4.80 higher per barrel on international markets. The reason was simple and immediate. Roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Gulf of Oman and the surrounding corridor every single day. When a U.S. Navy destroyer opens fire on a vessel in those waters, the markets do not wait for a diplomatic explanation. They reprice the risk instantly. In Beijing, the reaction was quiet but careful. China has maintained an official posture of neutrality in the U.S.-Iran standoff, but the Arash seizure complicated that posture in a way that is difficult to paper over. Intelligence summaries shared with allied governments after the boarding indicated that at least 2 drone component manufacturers represented in the Arash's cargo had connections to Chinese technology supply chains. That is not an accusation of Chinese government involvement. It is a complication. And it is the kind of complication that makes Beijing's neutrality harder to sustain in closed-door conversations with Washington. In Moscow, the response was immediate and predictable. Russian state media framed the entire operation as American imperialism and demanded international condemnation. What Russian state media declined to report was the satellite imagery that U.S. analysts had already shared with select allies. Imagery showing an IRGC logistics vessel docked at a port with documented connections to Russian military supply networks, captured 3 days before the Arash set sail. The story of what Iran is receiving and from where is bigger than one tanker, and the evidence being assembled by U.S. intelligence is growing. In every major shipping company from Karachi to Singapore, the Arash seizure sent a message that was received completely clearly. If your vessel is moving Iranian military materials under false registry, the U.S. Navy will identify you before you reach the interdiction zone. It will warn you for 6 hours, and if you do not stop, it will stop you. The blockade is not a line drawn in the water that clever paperwork can help you step across. It is a surveillance and enforcement system with global reach, and it is staffed by people who have been building files on these ships for nearly a year. 2 days after the Arash seizure, Iran canceled its delegation to a scheduled diplomatic meeting in Muscat. The Iranian Foreign Ministry's stated reason was that no talks could proceed while the blockade remained active. The real reason, according to sources familiar with the internal Iranian position, was considerably simpler. The negotiating team had lost a significant piece of leverage the moment those 18 containers were opened and their contents were photographed. The MT Arash is currently sitting in a U.S.-controlled anchorage in the Arabian Sea. Her Panamanian registration has been formally canceled. Her crew is in custody. Her cargo is in American possession, serving as evidence in what will become a significant legal and intelligence case. She is, as of today, a ship without a country, 180 meters of steel that tried to be something it was not, in waters it should never have entered, on a mission that American intelligence knew about for 11 months before the moment she went dark and started running. That image, a vessel floating under no flag, surrounded by the naval assets that identified, warned, disabled, and seized her before breakfast, is exactly the image that Iran's planners did not want the world to see. Not because of what it says about one ship, because of what it says about the entire system they built to keep their military supply lines running through the blockade. You can forge a registry. You can hire a captain with 18 years of covert maritime experience. You can run your darkest, fastest, most carefully documented operation yet, but you cannot outrun a surveillance network that has been watching your ship since last June. The Arash never had a real chance of reaching Jask. She was already in the database before she left port. What Iran will do next is predictable in its broad shape, even if the specific details are unknown. They will try different routes. They will try different vessel types. They will try to fragment the supply chain into smaller movements that are harder to track individually. The pressure that the blockade is putting on Iranian military logistics is real and it is significant, and that kind of pressure produces creative responses. But every variation of the approach runs into the same problem the Arash ran into, which is that the United States has spent 4 decades building the intelligence, surveillance, and response capability to find exactly these kinds of operations. There is no paperwork clever enough to defeat an 11-month intelligence file. Iran wanted the Arash to deliver her cargo before dawn and disappear. Instead, she delivered a lesson. The lesson is the same one that was delivered in the Persian Gulf in 1988, the same one the USS Ramage reinforced on April 22, 2026. There is no covert route through a blockade enforced by a navy that already knows your name. The Arash tried to turn that lesson into a question. The USS Ramage answered it, and every ship currently moving toward this blockade perimeter is going to face the same answer, on the same terms, with the same outcome. Subscribe right now and stay with us. We are tracking every movement in the Gulf of Oman, every diplomatic development, and every escalation in real time. What comes next in this crisis is going to move fast, and when it does, you need to be here. This is not over, not even close.